The door swung open. Derek walked in, shoulders back, chin up, like a man who had already decided how this was going to end. Behind him, a woman, blonde, polished, holding his hand like she'd been holding it for years. Nora stood at the kitchen counter, 7 months pregnant, one hand on her stomach, eyes moving from Derek to the woman to the gold chain around her neck, his grandmother's necklace, the one he told Nora was too precious to risk losing. Her voice came out quiet, dangerously quiet. Derek, she looked at the woman. Who is she? Not a question. Derek didn't flinch. This is Celeste. His voice was flat, rehearsed. She's moving in. The room went completely still. Nora's hand pressed harder against her belly. I'm carrying your child, she said. I know, he said. Then say it again, she said. Look at me and say it again. He looked at her. No shame, no hesitation. You have 2 hours, he said. I'll call about your things. Celeste stood in the doorway, watching, silent. The expression on her face said everything she didn't bother to say out loud. Nora picked up her coat. She picked up her bag. She walked past both of them without a single word. At the door, she stopped. She turned around one last time. She looked at the woman wearing the necklace. She looked at the man she had given 3 years of her life to. And she said very softly, I hope it was worth it. Then she walked out into the rain, alone, with nothing but $200 and a baby on the way. She had no idea that the man who would change everything was already watching. If you want to know how a woman with nothing left built a life that made him regret everything, stay with us. This is her story. The rain started at 7 minutes past 6. Nora Callahan knew the exact time because she had been watching the microwave clock. Watching it the way you watch something when your body already knows, when your stomach already knows, when every cell in you is braced for something your mind hasn't caught up to yet. 6. Oh, 7. She was standing at the kitchen counter. Her hands were wrapped around a mug of tea that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. She hadn't moved. The tea sat there, cold and bitter and forgotten. Like everything else in that apartment, she heard the elevator down the hall, then footsteps. One set she knew, Derek's walk, that particular rhythm, heavy on the left heel. She had listened to that walk for 3 years. She could identify it through walls. Then another set, lighter, quicker, unfamiliar. The door opened. She didn't turn around. She kept her eyes on the window above the sink, rain sliding down the glass, the city blurring behind it. She breathed in. She breathed out. She waited. Nora. His voice. Derek's voice. The same voice that had said, I love you on a Tuesday morning 3 years ago in a coffee shop on Clement Street. She had been holding a blueberry muffin, warm, fresh from the oven. She remembered the way it felt in her hand. She put the mug down carefully. Then she turned. Derek stood in the doorway between the hall and the kitchen. He was wearing the blue shirt, the one she had ironed that morning. She had ironed it at 7 a.m. while he slept. 7 months pregnant, her back aching, standing at the ironing board because the shirt needed to be pressed and someone had to do it. She had done it. She had always done it. Beside him stood a woman, blonde, slim, maybe 27. The kind of put together that looks effortless but isn't. Everything chosen, everything deliberate. She was holding Derek's hand, not nervously, not the way you hold a hand when you're unsure, comfortably, the way you hold something that belongs to you. Nora looked at the hand. She looked at Derek. She said nothing. I need you to leave, Derek said. 3 words. After 3 years. After 1 shared lease and 2 shared vacations and 1 very shared pregnancy. After 3 years of her life inside these walls. After assembling the crib alone in the 2nd bedroom because he kept saying he would get to it. After painting the nursery herself on a Saturday while he was at what he called a work event. 3 words. What? Nora said. Not because she hadn't heard him. She heard every syllable. She said it because her brain needed a second. Just 1 second to process what her ears had already understood completely. This is Celeste, Derek said. She's moving in. Nora looked at the woman. Celeste. Celeste looked back. There was something in her eyes. Not quite triumph. Not quite guilt. Something in between. The expression of a woman who has been waiting in a long line and has finally reached the front and is trying to be gracious about it. Derek, Nora said. Very quiet. I'm 7 months pregnant. I know, he said. With your child, I know, he said again. She waited. She waited for something behind the words. Some flicker of shame. Some crack in the surface. Something that told her that somewhere inside the blue iron shirt was the man she thought she had built a life with. Nothing came. His eyes were steady, almost bored. The eyes of a man who had rehearsed this. Who had planned it. Who had decided before he walked through the door exactly how this was going to go and was simply executing the plan. You have 2 hours, he said. I'll call about the rest of your things. Nora looked at his hand, at Celeste's hand in his. She looked at Celeste's neck, a gold chain, delicate, very old-looking. She knew that chain. She had seen it in a photograph in Derek's parents' hallway. His grandmother's necklace. The one he had told Nora was too delicate to wear every day, too sentimental to risk losing. The one he had apparently given to the woman he was leaving her for. The rain picked up outside. Nora put her mug in the sink. She picked up her coat from the chair, her purse from the counter. Her phone charger was still in the wall by the refrigerator. She crossed the kitchen, unplugged it, coiled it, put it in her purse. She walked past Derek, past Celeste. She could smell Celeste's perfume, something bright and expensive, something that cost more than Nora's grocery budget. At the door she stopped. She did not cry. She did not beg. She did not say anything about the 3 years, or the baby, or the crib she had assembled alone, or the shirt she had ironed that morning. She said, "I hope it was worth it." Then she walked out into the rain. The elevator was slow. She stood in the hallway and waited for it. She could hear nothing from inside the apartment. No argument. No second thoughts. Just silence. The elevator came. She got in. She pressed the lobby button. She watched the doors close. The lobby was empty. She walked through it, out the front door, into the rain. She stood on the sidewalk, just stood there. Her hand went to her stomach. Automatic, the way it always did now. The baby moved. A small flutter, like a question mark pressed from the inside. I know, she thought. I don't know what we do either. The rain was cold. She pulled her coat closed. It didn't quite reach across her belly anymore. It hadn't for a month. She stood there with her coat open at the front, and the rain coming down, and the city moving around her like nothing had happened. Like the world had not just shifted sideways. A cab passed. She didn't raise her hand. She checked her phone 3 times. Lock, unlock, lock, unlock, lock. No text from Derek. Course not. She thought about calling her mother. She thought about calling Brenda. She stood on the corner of Valencia and 22nd and felt the rain on her face and thought very clearly and very specifically, I am not going to fall apart on this corner. I am going to fall apart somewhere dry. She hailed a cab. Where to? The driver asked. She gave him her mother's address in the Sunset District. Then she sat back and watched the city go past the window. All those lit windows. All those people inside. Warm. Dry. In their kitchens making dinner. Living their ordinary Tuesday evenings. She pressed one hand flat to her stomach. The baby moved again. The fare was $14. She gave him 20. She did not know why exactly. It felt important to be generous in that moment. Like if she could still be generous, she was still herself. She rang her mother's doorbell at 6:42. Ruth opened the door. She took one look at her daughter, at the rain-soaked coat, at the careful, controlled posture, at the hand pressed to the belly. She didn't ask anything. She just said, "Come inside," and held the door open wide. And that one simple wordless act of welcome. That was when Nora Callahan finally let herself cry. Ruth made tea. This was what Ruth Callahan did in a crisis. She made tea and she cut something. Bread, cake, whatever was available. The cutting was important, the knife through the loaf, the neat slices, the control of it when everything else felt like it was spinning. Tonight she cut a lemon pound cake she had made on Sunday. Nora sat at the kitchen table in dry clothes, her mother's bathrobe. Enormous on her even with the belly. She wrapped both hands around a mug of chamomile and stared at the steam rising from it. Ruth put a plate of cake in front of her. Neither of them said anything for a while. The kitchen smelled like lemon and dish soap, and the particular warmth of a house that has been lived in for decades. The clock on the wall ticked. The refrigerator hummed. Rain hit the window. "How long?" Ruth asked. Very quietly. Nora looked up. "How long has she been?" "I don't know," Nora said. "Long enough that she was comfortable. Long enough that she was holding his hand like she'd been doing it for a long time." Ruth made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Nora looked down at her mug. "She was wearing his grandmother's necklace," she said. She hadn't planned to say that. It arrived out of nowhere. But once it was said, it sat on the table between them like something solid and heavy. Ruth put down the knife. "Nora, the necklace he told me was at his parents' house," Nora said. "Too delicate to wear every day. Too sentimental to risk losing." Ruth was quiet. "How long did you know?" Very quiet. Not an accusation. A real question. The kind you ask when you already half know the answer. Her mother's face did something complicated. Something that moved through several expressions in a few seconds. "I didn't know," Ruth said carefully. "I suspected. There was something. I couldn't name it exactly. Just something that felt off. Last Christmas. When he kept stepping outside to take calls." "Last Christmas," Nora said. 8 months ago. She had been 4 months pregnant last Christmas. She had been so happy. She had wrapped a tiny pair of shoes in silver paper and put them under the tree for Derek to find on Christmas morning. He had cried. She had thought he was crying because he was moved. Because he was happy. Because the shoes meant what they were supposed to mean. God, I was so stupid. The signs were all there. She felt it arrive. That specific, terrible clarity. The way the past reorganizes itself when you finally have the full picture. Every moment you thought was one thing revealing itself to be something else entirely. She sat there and let it sort through her. The calls he stepped away to take. Always just out of earshot. The gym bag he started keeping in his car. For the gym he rarely seemed to actually attend. The way he had stopped reaching for her hand when they walked. The evenings he worked late and came home smelling like he had showered somewhere else. The twice he had called her by the wrong name. Just the first syllable. Cut off fast, she had told herself she misheard. She had not misheard. Each memory came up separately, then the next, then the next. Like a hand of cards turning face up one by one, the suit only becoming clear when most of them were on the table. He never loved me. He loved the idea of me. She didn't say it out loud yet. It was too new, too raw. But she felt it settle in her chest like something that had been trying to land for a long time and had finally found solid ground. Brenda arrived at 9. She had driven 40 minutes from the other side of the city. She came in wearing hospital scrubs from a shift she had apparently come straight from. She was carrying a bag of takeout from the Thai place on Irving Street. She set it on the table. She looked at Nora's face. She sat down. Eat first, she said. Brenda, then we talk. Nora ate. Pad see ew. Wide noodles, the kind she had been craving for weeks. It tasted like nothing specific, and also like the kindest thing anyone had done for her all day. When the container was mostly empty, Brenda put her elbows on the table. Okay, she said. I have to tell you something. Nora looked at her. Brenda's expression was the expression of someone who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has finally decided to set it down, regardless of what happens when it hits the floor. I saw him, Brenda said. February. At that restaurant on Fillmore, the Italian place with the red awning. He was with a woman, blonde, sitting across from him like it was completely normal. Like it was something they did all the time. Nora didn't move. I told myself it was a work thing, Brenda continued. I told myself I didn't know what I was looking at. I told myself it wasn't my business. I told myself you would figure it out on your own, and it would be better coming from you than from me. She stopped. Her jaw was tight. I should have told you in February. You should have, Nora said. I know. I'm not angry, Nora said. You should be. I don't have the energy right now, Nora said. I'll save it for the right place. Brenda reached across the table, took Nora's hand in both of hers. Nora led her. They sat like that for a moment. What do you need? Brenda said. Nora thought about the apartment, the crib in the second bedroom she had assembled herself. The name they hadn't quite agreed on, the savings account. The savings account. She hadn't thought about the savings account yet. Not specifically. Not in terms of what Derek might have done with it. She pulled out her phone. I need to check something, she said. She opened the bank app. She had not looked at it since before everything happened. Before the sidewalk. Before the rain. 2 days ago, she had been a woman with a shared savings account and a due date in 8 weeks. She navigated to savings. 0. Not low. Not decreased significantly. 0. The number sat on the screen. White background. Clean font. Absolutely clear. That was $43,000, she said, very quietly. Ruth made a sound from across the kitchen. Brenda leaned forward. When did you last check? She said. 6 days ago, Nora said. 6 days ago, there was $43,000 in that account? She checked the checking account. $218. She put the phone face down on the table. She sat very still. He didn't just leave. He cleaned me out first. He planned this. He chose a date. He moved the money. Then he walked in with her and told me I had 2 hours. She breathed in. She breathed out. I need a lawyer, she said. Yes, Brenda said. Tomorrow, Nora said. Tonight I just need to be here. She pressed both hands flat to her stomach. The baby moved under them. That particular flutter she had come to know over the last few months. Like a hello, like a reminder. I'm still here. We're still here. I'm going to be okay, Nora said. Not to Brenda, not to Ruth, to the baby. Ruth refilled the tea without being asked. The kettle whistled and then went quiet. Rain was still hitting the window. The kitchen clock ticked on. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere across the city, a woman named Celeste was sleeping in Nora's bed, wearing Derek's grandmother's necklace. In the apartment Nora had decorated and painted and considered home for 2 years, Nora sat in her mother's kitchen and made herself breathe. She was going to be okay. She didn't know how yet, but she was going to be okay. I'm not crazy. I know what I saw, and I know what comes next. She held on to that. The solidity of it. The simple fact that she was not imagining anything. She was not being dramatic. She was not overreacting. She picked up her mug and drank her tea. It was still warm. She found the lawyer through Brenda's hospital network. Andrea Faust, 43 years old. Family law for 8 years. An office on the 4th floor of a building on Market Street with a view of a parking garage and 2 framed certificates on the wall behind her desk. Nora stared at those certificates while Andrea read. 3 years of joint bank statements. 1 year of credit card records that Nora had photographed from the shoebox under the bed during her 2 hours. The lease agreement. A printed copy of the savings account showing $43,000 6 days before the current zero. Andrea read in silence, precise and focused. Then she looked up. How long ago were you removed from the joint account, she asked. I wasn't, Nora said. We both have access. Or I thought we did. Did you attempt to log in this morning? I did, Nora said. The access is still there. The money isn't. Andrea wrote something on her notepad. Her handwriting was small and exact. The transfer would have required his authorization, Andrea said. which means it was deliberate and premeditated. Yes, Nora said. And the checking account? $218. Yes. Do you know if he has separate accounts you were unaware of? Nora thought about this. She thought about all the things she had not known. The calls outside, the gym bag in the car, the necklace. She thought about a conversation from 2 years ago. They had been talking about investments. Derek had mentioned a financial advisor, a name she had heard once and never again, a meeting she had not been invited to. I think so, she said. I don't know for certain. We'll find out, Andrea said. Nora exhaled. She looked at the parking garage through the window. A pigeon sat on the ledge outside, completely still, like it was thinking about something serious. What happened next surprised her is how she would describe this moment later to Brenda. But in the moment itself, it wasn't surprise. It was recognition. The memories came back differently in that office, sorted by category instead of by emotion. The vacation to Napa 2 years ago. Derek had paid in cash. She hadn't thought about it then. Cash was just cash. Now she thought, where did the cash come from? The new watch last spring. Expensive. He said it was a bonus. She hadn't asked which account the bonus went into. She had trusted him to handle money because he had said he was good at it, because it was easier, because she had been busy being pregnant and working and assembling cribs and ironing shirts. I was so busy being useful that I stopped watching. The expensive dinners he had claimed were client entertainment, charged to a card she didn't have access to. She had seen the statements once briefly and not looked closely enough. He was hiding money, not just from me, from the relationship, from our future. She sat in that lawyer's office, with the pigeon on the ledge outside, and felt the past 3 years reorganize themselves completely. She had thought she was building something with someone. She had been building alone, and he had been watching her build it while quietly making other plans. What can I do? She said. Several things, Andrea said. The timing of the transfer matters significantly. If the transfer occurred after a point at which we can demonstrate the relationship materially changed, and there are emails, texts, any documentation, we can build a case for wrongful dissipation of shared assets. You were cohabiting. There is a 3-year financial record. He has legal exposure here. Good, Nora said. Beyond the financial matter, paternity is not in question? He knows it's his, Nora said. He has never questioned it. That doesn't mean he'll behave accordingly, Andrea said. I know, Nora said. She sat straighter in the chair. Her back ached. It had ached for months. She was used to it. She breathed through it. I want to know, she said, exactly what I'm entitled to. I want to know what he has, where it is, what accounts, what assets. I want to know everything. Andrea looked at her steadily. Something shifted in the lawyer's expression. A slight recalibration, like she had walked in expecting one kind of client and was meeting a different one. Then we'll find out, Andrea said. Nora left the office and stood on Market Street in the gray afternoon light. Traffic moved past. A cable car rang its bell somewhere to her right. She stood on the pavement with her hand on her stomach and thought, I deserved better than this, not as a question, not as something she was trying to convince herself of, as a fact, as clear and solid as the $43,000 that had been in that account and was now gone. I deserved better, and I am going to do something about it. She didn't know yet exactly what that looked like. She didn't know how a woman with $218 and no home and a baby coming in 8 weeks built a case against a man who had been planning his exit for months. But she had Andrea Faust. She had the bank records. She had the photographs from the shoebox. And she had the clear anger, the sharp kind, the kind that doesn't scream, the kind that focuses. She walked to the bus stop. On the bus home, she opened the Notes app on her phone. She started writing every account she could remember, every financial conversation they had ever had, every purchase that hadn't quite made sense, every mention of investments, every holiday where he bought something expensive without discussing it. She wrote for 40 minutes without stopping. When her stop came, she almost missed it. She got off the bus and walked to her mother's house and sat at the kitchen table and kept writing. Starting over feels impossible, but staying feels worse. She thought about the cab driver, the $14 fare, the 20 she had given him. She thought about the blueberry muffin, the coffee shop, the Tuesday morning. She thought about the man she thought she had loved and the man she now understood she had actually been living with. They were not the same man. She had been in love with a version that never quite existed, and somewhere along the way she had given that version everything. Her time, her savings, her labor, her trust. She wasn't angry at her past self. She understood her past self completely. You trust people you love. That is not stupidity. That is what love requires. But the trust was done now, and she was very clear about what came next. 3 weeks after the sidewalk, Nora had a job. Temporary, but paying. A design agency downtown needed a freelance graphic designer for a 2-month project. A former colleague had sent the listing on a Wednesday afternoon. By Thursday morning, Nora had updated her portfolio. She had done it at 2 in the morning, sitting at her mother's kitchen table, Ren moving steadily inside her while the rest of the house slept. She got the job. $1,200 a week. Not much. But it was $1,200 a week that had nothing to do with Derek. Every dollar of it was entirely hers. She celebrated by buying a blueberry muffin from the bakery 2 blocks from her mother's house. She sat on a bench in the pale November sun and ate it slowly and thought about nothing specific. It tasted like a beginning. The design agency's first client presentation was at the Harrington Hotel downtown, 5th floor. Conference room B. Nora took the bus. She was 8 weeks from her due date and moving carefully, but she was moving. That was the point. Moving carefully was still moving. The lobby of the Harrington was the kind of lobby that makes you feel immediately underdressed. 20-foot ceilings, Italian marble floors, floral arrangements the size of small trees beside the elevator banks. The air smelled like white flowers and expensive carpet. She was crossing toward the elevator when it happened. A man came around the corner moving fast, reading his phone. She saw him too late. He saw her too late. She moved right. He moved right. She moved left. He moved left. The sidewalk dance that ends in collision. His briefcase clipped her elbow. Her files went sideways. She lost her balance on the polished marble. She didn't fall. Strong hands, one at her elbow, one at her back, solid and certain. She was righted before she had time to process what had happened. Back on her feet, files on the floor between them. "I'm sorry," he said. "Are you all right?" She looked up, tall, maybe 6'2". Dark hair with gray coming in at the temples. A suit that had been made for him specifically and not purchased off a rack. A face that was serious and angular and not what she would call handsome in the conventional way, but was what she might call compelling. "I'm fine," she said. "You should sit down," he said. "I'm fine," she said again. "You almost fell on marble." "I didn't fall because I caught you," he said. No arrogance, just fact. She looked at him for a moment. "Thank you for catching me," she said. He bent and gathered her files from the floor, efficient. No ceremony about it. He handed them to her in a neat stack. His eyes moved to her stomach for exactly 1 second. Not rudely, just noting. "Griffin Holt," he said. He held out his hand. "Nora Callahan," she said. They shook. His grip was firm. Hers was too. He seemed to notice. "What floor?" he asked. "5th," she said. "Same," he said. They rode up in the elevator together. The kind of silence that isn't uncomfortable. Just 2 people sharing a small space. The elevator smelled like his cologne. Something clean. Like cedar and cold air. "Client presentation?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "You?" "Board meeting," he said. The doors opened at 5. They stepped into the corridor, rooms to the right and left. He went left. She went right. She had taken 4 steps when she heard him say her name. She turned. He was standing in the middle of the hallway, briefcase in hand, looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I hope it goes well," he said. "Thank you," she said. She went to conference room B. She gave the presentation. She had spent 12 hours preparing it. Every slide. Every word. Every transition. She presented it to 3 people around a conference table, and she did not think about the sidewalk or Derek or the zero in the savings account. She thought only about the work. She answered their questions. She thanked them. She left. On the bus home, she realized she had not thought about any of it for 2 hours. That was the most valuable thing that had happened to her in 3 weeks. She looked him up that evening. Griffin Holt. It took 30 seconds to find him. It took another 10 minutes to actually read past the headlines. Founder of Holt Capital. Private infrastructure fund, 15 years, $40 million to $3 billion, known for being difficult to negotiate against, known for not losing. She almost closed the browser. Then she found an article from 2 years prior, a profile in a business journal. She almost didn't read it. But something made her scroll down. One quote, buried near the end of a long piece. "The most undervalued asset in any situation," he had said, "is the person everyone counted out." She read it twice. Then she put her phone down and looked out the window at the city going past in the dark. She thought about being the person everyone counted out. Derek had counted her out. He had taken the money and planned the replacement and executed the exit. He had counted on her being too overwhelmed, too pregnant, too emotionally compromised to do anything about it. He made an error, she thought. She picked up her phone and texted Andrea. "I have more documents to send you. Can we talk tomorrow?" Andrea replied within 4 minutes. "Yes, 8 a.m. Nora put the phone down. She pressed her hand to her stomach. "We're going to be okay," she thought. Both of us. The presentation had gone well. The client had liked her concepts. The agency lead had emailed the next day to say she had done excellent work. She had read that email 3 times. Not because she doubted it, because she needed to let it be real. She had gone home and told her mother and eaten dinner and gone to bed feeling, for the first time in weeks, like something was working. Then Derek called. Not about the money. Not about the pregnancy. Not about the zero in the savings account or the conversation they were going to have through lawyers eventually. He called about the furniture. Celeste had looked at the apartment and decided she did not want the couch, or the dining table, or most of what Nora had chosen and bought and arranged in that apartment over 2 years. She has her own dining table, Derek said. So if you want to pick up your table, just let me know when. Nora sat in her mother's guest room and stared at the ceiling for one long moment. The table I picked out, she said. It's a nice table, he said. Celeste just already has one. Derek, she said. What? You took $43,000 from our account. Silence, not the surprised kind of silence, the prepared kind. The silence of someone who knew this was coming and had decided how to respond to it. That was my money too, he said. It was money we both put in, she said. For 3 years. I needed it for... He stopped. For what? She said. For Celeste's apartment renovation? For the necklace? What did you need $43,000 for that you couldn't tell me about? This isn't the time to have this conversation, he said. My lawyer will be in touch, she said. She hung up. She sat very still for 30 seconds. Her heart was beating fast, not from fear, from something much cleaner than fear. She picked up the phone and called Brenda. He called about the furniture, she said when Brenda answered. Of course he did, Brenda said. He wants to know if I want my dining table back because Celeste has her own. The table I bought. The table I picked out at that furniture place on Divisadero, where we spent 3 hours because I couldn't decide between the oak and the walnut. The walnut, Brenda said. The walnut, Nora confirmed. A pause. How are you, Brenda asked. Past angry, Nora said. I'm in the clear place past angry, where everything is very sharp and very obvious. Stay in that place, Brenda said. That's the good place. Nora exhaled, long and slow. Celeste's uncle is Thomas Vane, she said, city councilman. Sits on the city planning committee. Derek's company got a zoning variance approved 3 months ago for a development project on the east side. Silence from Brenda. How long have you been looking into this? Brenda asked. 3 weeks, Nora said. Insomnia is very productive. I'm not doing anything, Nora said. I'm knowing things. Knowing things is different from doing anything. That's what people say before they do something, Brenda said. Maybe, Nora said. But for now, I'm telling my lawyer. She told Andrea the next morning. All of it. The councilman, the variance, the timeline, the pattern. Andrea listened without interrupting. She wrote everything down in the small, precise handwriting. The financial case is strong, Andrea said when Nora finished. The connection between the variance and Celeste's family may or may not be relevant to your specific situation. But I want you to understand the priority sequence. First, we establish child support. Second, we recover the dissipated assets. Third, we address any other matters that become relevant. I understand the sequence, Nora said. You have more energy than I expected, Andrea said. Is that a problem? No, Andrea said. It's useful. I just want to make sure it's sustainable. You are 32 weeks pregnant. 33, Nora said. 33 weeks pregnant, Andrea said, and in better shape than most people I meet in this office. Nora looked at her. He underestimated me, Nora said. Significantly, Andrea said. Nora walked out of the lawyer's office into the midday light. She walked to the small park 2 blocks away. She sat on a bench. The city moved around her. A dog chased a pigeon. A woman pushed a stroller. A man ate a sandwich on a bench across the path. She felt the baby rest heavy and low. That particular weight. The particular presence of another person inside her body. She had stopped thinking of it as abstract weeks ago. It was a person, specific and real. I'm going to give you everything, she thought. She didn't know how yet. The specifics were still being assembled, but the certainty of it was complete. She thought about Griffin Holt. The quote from the article. The most undervalued asset in any situation is the person everyone counted out. She thought about the elevator, the firm handshake. She thought about the way he had said, because I caught you, without any arrogance. Just as fact, she put that thought away, folded it carefully and set it aside. She had 33 weeks of pregnancy management, a lawsuit to build, a freelance project to deliver, and $218 that had since become $834 because she had been working. She could not afford to think about compelling men in hotel lobbies. She went home and got back to work. She was 36 weeks when the pain started, not labor. She knew what labor felt like from everything Brenda had explained. This was different, a tightness across her upper right abdomen. Not sharp, pressing, persistent. It woke her at 3 in the morning. She lay still for 20 minutes trying to breathe through it. The tightness didn't ease. She got up. She went to the bathroom. She sat on the edge of the tub in the dark bathroom and timed the sensation. It wasn't contractions. She woke her mother. Ruth drove her to St. Francis without asking questions. She just put on her coat over her nightgown and picked up her keys and said, "Let's go." Emergency intake was fast. A nurse took Nora's blood pressure. Read the number. Called for a second nurse immediately. 160/110. The doctor was young, brisk, efficient in the way that means she was already moving in her mind to the next step before she finished the current one. Preeclampsia, she said. We're admitting you tonight. I'm 36 weeks, Nora said. I know, we're going to monitor closely. 36 weeks is viable, but our goal is to keep this pregnancy going as long as we safely can. Ruth was in the waiting room. Brenda arrived at 4:30. She came in still wearing scrubs from a night shift she had just finished at her own hospital across the city. She sat beside Nora and held her hand and did not say anything dramatic. She just held on. That was exactly right. Nora stared at the ceiling. The ceiling of a hospital room at 3:30 in the morning is a very specific kind of ceiling. It asks nothing of you but staying alive, which sounds simple until you're lying underneath it alone. She had been alone in harder rooms than this. She told herself that. But this particular kind of alone went into places that the daytime kept covered. The places that only open at 3:30 a.m., when the fear is not for yourself but for someone you haven't met yet, someone whose whole life is still theoretical, someone entirely dependent on the body that is currently not behaving correctly. He's not coming. She hadn't called Derek. She didn't want to call Derek. But she was also aware in the sharp 3:30 way that there was a man somewhere across this city who was the other half of this equation, who should have been in this room, who had chosen not to be. She thought about the way he had held Celeste's hand, so comfortable, so practiced, like something long established. He never loved me. He loved the idea of me, the idea of her, capable and reliable and undemanding and useful. The woman who handled things so smoothly that he never had to think about what was being handled, who ironed the shirts and assembled the cribs and made the apartment beautiful and managed the household and asked for nothing except to be loved back. She had asked so little, and he had given even less than that. Somewhere along the way I became invisible, she thought. She said it out loud, quietly, just to hear it. What? Brenda asked. Somewhere along the way I became invisible to him, Nora said. I was so busy being useful that I stopped being a person to him. I was just a function, just something that ran correctly in the background. Brenda was quiet for a moment. You were always a person, she said finally. He was the one who couldn't see. I know, Nora said, but I think I let it happen. I think I stopped asking for things. I stopped taking up space. I made myself small because it was easier than having the argument about why I needed more. She pressed her hand to her stomach. The baby moved under her palm. I'm not going to do that with you, she thought. I'm going to take up all my space. And I'm going to teach you to take up all yours. The doctor came back at 6 a.m. Blood pressure had lowered somewhat, still concerning but moving in the right direction. Bed rest, steroid injections to help the baby's lungs. Monitoring for the foreseeable short-term future. We're not delivering today, the doctor said, but we're watching closely, Nora exhaled. Thank you, she said. She was in the hospital for 4 days. She worked from her laptop. Her mother brought it from the house. She video called the agency. She answered emails. She delivered the final assets for the project on Thursday from a hospital bed and sent the invoice from the same bed and felt entirely herself doing it. On the third day, Derek texted. Brenda mentioned you were in the hospital. Are you okay? She looked at the text for a long time. She wrote back, yes. I'll have my lawyer contact yours about the birth certificate and visitation arrangement. She put the phone face down on the hospital tray table. Then she picked up her laptop and kept working. The hardest part is admitting I knew all along. She thought about that. About all the small things she had set aside. All the moments she had filed under not worth making an issue of because she had been tired or pregnant or just wanted a quiet evening. She had known. Not completely. Not with certainty. But somewhere below the surface she had known that something was wrong. And she had chosen not to look directly at it, because looking directly at it would have required doing something about it. So she had looked away. She had ironed the shirt. She had assembled the crib. She had looked away. That was the part she had to sit with. Not as punishment, just as truth. Because understanding it was the only way to make sure she never did it again. The second time she saw Griffin Holt was not by accident. Or rather it was. She had not planned it. But looking back later, she would think that some things that look like accidents are really just timing. She had been out of the hospital for 2 weeks. 38 weeks pregnant. The doctor was cautiously optimistic. Nora was on modified activity, slow and careful, but moving. She had come downtown to drop off the hard copy final deliverables for the design project at the agency. 4 blocks from the Harrington Hotel. She had not thought about that. Or she had thought about it briefly and told herself it was irrelevant. She came out of the agency building into the cold December air and walked directly into a man standing by the door looking at his phone. She caught herself on the door handle. He looked up. Griffin Holt. They looked at each other. You're still standing, he said. You're still not watching where you're going, she said. Neither were you, he said. Again, something crossed his face. Not quite a smile. The place where a smile might eventually go. Are you all right, he asked. The question was direct, not social, not performative concern. Actually asking. She thought about the reflexive answer. The one that cost nothing and required nothing from either person. Instead, she said, I've had a difficult few weeks. Hospital, he said. She looked at him. How did you know that? You have the look, he said. I've spent time in hospitals. There's a particular quality to the tiredness. She studied him. There was something behind what he had said, something he was not elaborating on. She didn't ask. Preeclampsia, she said. 4 days, I'm better now. He nodded. And the father, he asked. Flat question, not judgmental, just asking, not in the picture, she said. He nodded once, like he was filing that alongside other information. Are you walking somewhere? He said. I was going to get a cab, she said. I'll walk you to the corner, he said. Unless you'd rather I didn't. She considered, the cold, the 4 blocks to the cab stand. This man who was a stranger but did not feel like one. All right, she said. They walked. He adjusted his pace to hers without commenting on it. He matched her exactly. You're the designer, he said. The agency on 5th Street. How do you know that? The conference room walls are thin, he said. Your client laughed a lot during your presentation. They were happy with the work, she said. They were, he said. I looked you up. She stopped walking. He stopped beside her. Why, she said. Because you shook my hand like someone with nothing to prove, he said. I don't encounter that often. She looked at him for a moment. This tall, serious, unexpectedly direct man who apparently researched people from hotel elevator encounters. I looked you up too, she said. I know, he said. I have alerts on my name. Of course you do, she said. They started walking again. The article, he said. The quote about undervalued assets. I read it twice, she said. I meant it, he said. I know you did, she said. That's why I read it twice. At the corner, he flagged a cab. It appeared from nowhere, the way cabs appear for certain people. He opened the door. She got in carefully. He held the door. Nora Callahan, he said. Griffin Holt, she said. Rest, he said. I'll rest when the work is done, she said. Both, he said. He closed the door. She looked at him through the window as the cab pulled away. He was already looking at his phone, but then he glanced up just for a second. He watched the cab go. She faced forward. She thought about what it meant that he had looked her up, that he had alerts, that he had walked with her to the corner without any apparent agenda. She thought about the hospital bed, the ceiling at 3:30 in the morning, the specific loneliness of not having someone to tell first when something went right. She thought, I am not ready for anything. I am 38 weeks pregnant, and I have a lawsuit, and I have $218, that is now almost $2,000, and I am absolutely not thinking about this man. She thought about him for the rest of the afternoon. Wren Callahan was born at 11:22 on a Thursday morning, 5 days before her due date, 7 pounds and 2 ounces, a full head of dark hair, eyes that were the blue-gray of all new babies but that Nora was already watching carefully. She lay in the hospital bed with Wren on her chest and felt something happen that she had no words for. Like a country being founded, like all her internal geography rearranging itself to make room for this particular new person. Hello, she thought. I've been waiting for you. Ruth was crying at the side of the bed. Brenda was crying by the window. Nora was not crying. She was too busy looking, too busy taking inventory of this small, specific face. Wren yawned, the whole face involved. Both fists raised beside her cheeks. Eyes scrunched, everything committed to the yawn. Oh, Nora said, just that, just oh. Derek sent flowers, yellow tulips. They arrived while Nora was still in the maternity ward. Card read, congratulations to you both. Ruth put them on the windowsill without comment. Brenda looked at them and looked away. Nora looked at them for one moment. Then she said, would you ask them to move those to the waiting room? I'd rather have the window clear. Ruth moved the tulips. The window showed a square of December sky, cold blue, very clear and clean. Nora looked at the sky and at Wren and thought, the window is better. Derek came on the second day. He came alone. He came with an awkward expression and a stuffed bear that was slightly too large, and he stood in the doorway for a moment before Nora said, come in. He came in. He looked at Wren. His face did something complicated, something that moved through several things in a few seconds. He started. Beautiful, Nora said. You can say it. She's beautiful, he said. He did not reach for her. Nora did not offer. She held Wren against her chest and watched Derek look at his daughter from across the room. She felt something settle in her, something that had been tight for months. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Something more like understanding. He loves her. I can see it even from here. It was complicated. Loving someone who had hurt you so deliberately. It required holding two true things at once. He had been cruel to her. He loved this baby. Both things were real. Both things mattered. That's his burden to carry, she thought. Whatever he chose it knowing she was coming. He has to live with that. The lawyers are working out the visitation schedule, she said. I know, he said. I've been responsive. Good, she said. Nora, he started. Not today, she said, gently. Not here. He nodded. He stayed for 20 minutes. He did not hold Wren. He was not invited to. But he looked at her, and Nora saw that the looking cost him something real. That whatever he had decided and planned and executed, standing in this room and looking at what he had chosen not to be present for that was not free. Good. It should not be free. After he left, Brenda came back in. You okay? She said. Yes, Nora said, and she meant it. She was tired in every way a body can be tired. She was in the middle of a lawsuit. She had $2,000 in her account. She had a daughter who was 2 days old and who smelled like something that had no name, and she was okay. Genuinely, specifically okay. She looked at Ren. Ren was asleep with the complete conviction of someone who has decided this is a safe place to sleep. I'm going to make sure that's always true, Nora thought. 6 weeks later, with Ren sleeping in a bassinet beside the bed her mother had set up in the guest room, Nora opened her laptop at 2 in the morning. She updated her portfolio. She wrote a new professional bio. It took 3 drafts. The third one sounded like her, like the person she was becoming rather than the person she had been. She sent 3 proposals to 3 different companies. 2 of them wrote back within 48 hours. I deserve better, she thought, and I am building it. She closed the laptop. She looked at Ren sleeping. She thought about the specific loneliness of 2 in the morning, of doing everything yourself, of not having a person to tell first when something went right. She thought about a man in a hotel lobby who had walked her to the corner in December without any apparent agenda and watched the cab go. She put that thought away. Then, at 2:17 in the morning, her phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. This is Griffin Holt. I hope this isn't too late. If it is, I apologize. I have a business proposal that requires a face-to-face conversation. Would you meet me for dinner? She stared at the text. Ren made a small sound. Nora adjusted the blanket without looking away from her phone. She wrote back, "It is too late, but I'm awake." "What kind of proposal?" he replied in 2 minutes. "One that requires meeting in person. Are you available Friday?" She looked at Ren. Ren had no opinions about Friday. "Friday works," she wrote. "Somewhere with room for a stroller." "Done," he replied. She put down her phone. She pressed her lips to the top of Ren's head. The baby smelled like warmth and newness. Something is changing, Nora thought. She did not know yet exactly what, but she could feel it. The way you feel weather before it arrives. The pressure shifting. The air changing. Something was changing. And for the first time in months, she was not afraid of what came next. He chose the restaurant. Of course he did. It was the kind of place where the tables were spaced far enough apart for actual privacy, and where no one looked at the stroller sideways. They found a corner. Enough room. The lighting was warm. She arrived 5 minutes early. He arrived exactly on time. He looked the same as she remembered. Serious face. Good suit. A precision to everything about him that she had spent 6 weeks thinking was coldness, and had since revised to something more like care. The difference she was learning mattered. "You look rested," he said. "I'm not," she said. "But thank you for saying it." He looked at Ren in the stroller. Ren was awake and considering him with the serious attention of a 6-week-old conducting an evaluation. "She looks like you," he said. "I hope so," Nora said. "I did all the work." Something moved across his face. Quick, there and gone. But she saw it. They ordered. He had the fish. She had the pasta because Ren was still nursing, and she was hungry constantly in a way that still surprised her. He told her about the proposal over the appetizers, a restructure, a creative communications division that had been mismanaged for 2 years. He needed someone to come in from the outside, someone with precision, someone who understood what a brand was actually saying before they began changing it, someone without an internal agenda. "I saw your work," he said. The agency client showed the final presentation to 3 people before it went to print. "One of them sits on my advisory board." "Small world," she said. "Intentional," he said. "I find out about people I'm interested in." "That can be flattering or alarming," she said. "I hope in this case the former," he said. She looked at him across the table. The candlelight. The careful man across from her who had rebuilt a company from 40 million to 3 billion and donated 40% of his income to a foundation he never talked about publicly and who had walked with her to the corner in December just to make sure she got to the cab. "Why does a feared billionaire," she said, "need me specifically?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because feared billionaires," he said, "are surrounded by people who are afraid of them. And afraid people tell you what you want to hear. They don't tell you what you need to hear. You don't appear to be afraid of me." "Should I be?" she said. "No," he said. "But most people are." She thought about the quote from the article. The most undervalued asset in any situation is the person everyone counted out. She thought about Derek counting her out. She thought about herself, $218 on a sidewalk in the rain, the way she had walked through it, step by step. "I'll look at the brief," she said. "I won't commit to anything until I understand the full scope." "Fair," he said. "I work from home 3 days a week," she said. "Non-negotiable." She's 6 weeks old. "Understood," he said. "And if your team is difficult, I leave," she said. "I don't have bandwidth for difficult." "My team is professional," he said. "Good," she said. "Then we'll see." He walked her to the cab afterward. He held the stroller while she got in. He lifted Ren carefully, both hands under the baby, steady and certain. He handed her through the cab window. She noticed. Both hands. The steadiness. "Good night, Griffin," she said. "Good night, Nora," he said. She rode home thinking about the fee he had quoted. She thought about what it would mean for the savings account that was slowly rebuilding. She thought about the lawsuit settlement that Andrea now said was close. She thought about both hands under a baby. She put that thought away very carefully. The contract arrived 3 days later. Andrea reviewed it. "Take it," Andrea said. "It's legitimate and it's generous." She took it. She started on a Monday. Lena Cross met her at the elevator on the executive floor. Lena was 38 and efficient in a way that came from genuine competence rather than performance. She showed Nora the office space, the resources available, the team she would be coordinating. She did not smile immediately, but she was professional in a way that meant something. "He doesn't make these arrangements often," Lena said. "I'm aware," Nora said. "He had your work reviewed by 4 people before he contacted you," Lena said. "I know," Nora said. "He told me." Something shifted in Lena's expression. Slightly. "Most people are surprised by that," Lena said. "I believe he's thorough," Nora said. "I'm thorough too. We'll get along." Lena almost smiled, the corner of her mouth. Almost. 8 weeks in, the brand campaign was ready. She presented it on a Tuesday. Conference, long table, Griffin, 3 board members. The campaign was clean, honest, specific about what Holt Capital actually did, rather than what infrastructure funds generically claimed to do. It told the truth in the most compelling visual language she knew. The board asked questions. She answered everyone. Then Wallace Holt walked in. She had been warned by Lena. She had filed the warning away. Wallace was 71 and shorter than his son by 4 inches and made up for it with a quality she would later describe to Brenda as the kind of presence that fills rooms sideways. He sat down without being invited. Everyone in the room tracked him. Griffin did not turn his head. Nora continued her presentation. When she finished, Wallace said, "From the side of the room, who are you?" "Nora Callahan," she said. "Creative Director, Brand Identity." "Where were you before this?" "Freelance," she said. "Design agency before that." "Unmarried?" "Wallace," Griffin said. One word. The room understood it. Wallace stopped. The board approved the campaign unanimously. As the room cleared, Wallace stopped beside her. "You're talented," he said quietly. "That doesn't mean you belong here." "With respect," Nora said, equally quietly, "those are 2 different questions, and only one of them is yours to answer." He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved through his expression. Then he walked out. Griffin appeared at her elbow a moment later. "I'm sorry about him," he said. "Don't be," she said. "He wanted to see if I could be rattled." "And," he said. "I can't," she said. "Not by him." Something in his face settled. Like something he had been uncertain about was now confirmed. "The campaign launches next week," he said. "I know," she said. "I'll be watching the numbers." The campaign launched. In the first month, 3 institutional investors contacted Holt Capital who had not previously engaged with the firm. The agency press picked it up. Industry publications ran brief items. Griffin called her on the day the 3rd investor made contact. "The campaign is working," he said. "I know," she said. "I'd like to discuss expanding the scope," he said. "I'd like to discuss my contract terms first," she said. "Also something I want to discuss," he said. They had dinner again. The same corner table. Wren sleeping in the stroller beside her for the first hour before waking up and deciding she had opinions about restaurants. They were halfway through dessert when it happened. A woman stopped at their table. Mid-60s. Excellent posture. She knew Griffin from a foundation board. They exchanged brief pleasantries. She looked at Nora. She looked at Wren. She said to Griffin, warmly and with complete assumption, "Your family. How lovely." There was a beat. Nora opened her mouth. Griffin said, "Nora Callahan. She's leading our brand restructure." He paused 1 second. "And this is Wren, not my wife, not just a colleague, not a correction or a clarification, just names, given like they were worth giving, like they were his to introduce." The woman smiled, made pleasantries, moved on. After she left, Nora looked at him. He met her eyes. "You didn't correct her," she said. "She didn't ask a direct question," he said. "She made an assumption." "Yes," he said, "and you let her make it," he said. The table was quiet. Wren reached up and grabbed the edge of the tablecloth and looked very pleased with herself. "Why?" Nora said. He looked at her for a long moment. "Because," he said, very carefully, "I have been trying for approximately 2 months to find the right way to tell you something. And I haven't found the right way yet." "Then just say it," she said. "I would like to be in the room when things happen to you," he said. "Not instead of you, with you. I've been trying to say that since December and I haven't managed it until right now." Nora looked at him. Wren grabbed the tablecloth more firmly. "Griffin," she said. "I know the timing is terrible," she said. "Yes," he said. "I have a 4-month-old," she said. "I know. And a lawsuit that isn't fully settled." "I know. And I'm only just now beginning to trust my own judgment again," she said. "I know that too," he said. "I've watched you for 2 months. I know where you are." "Then why are you saying this now?" she said. He looked at her, that direct look, the one that didn't look away. "Because I think you're someone who deserves to know where they stand," he said. "I've let it be ambiguous long enough. That wasn't fair to you." She sat with that. The restaurant made its soft noises. Silver on china, low conversation. Wren abandoned the tablecloth and looked at the ceiling instead. I appreciate knowing where you stand, she said, finally. And, he said, and I need time, she said. Not because I don't, she stopped, started again. I just need time. All right, he said. You're very calm about that, she said. I've waited for things before, he said. When something matters, patience isn't difficult. She nodded. They finished dessert. On the way out, a man near the entrance recognized Griffin. He called out with the loud warmth of an old acquaintance. He looked at Nora. He looked at Wren. Your family? He said. Griffin looked at Nora. 1 second. Then he said, this is Nora, and this is Wren. Their names, given with weight. Like something he was proud to say, out loud. In the cab home, with Wren on her lap, Nora thought about the word feared, how the press used it, how business rivals used it, the feared billionaire, the man you didn't want to cross the table. And she thought, that is the same man who holds a baby with both hands, the same man who says names like they matter, the same man who sat across a dinner table and said, I would like to be in the room when things happen to you, and meant every word of it. She pressed her lips to the top of Wren's head. What do you think? She said softly. Wren was asleep and had no opinions. Nora looked out at the city, all those lit windows, all those lives. She felt something unfold in her chest, something that had been very tightly held for a very long time. Not love yet, or maybe the very beginning of it. The particular beginning that happens when you've been hurt enough to know what you're looking at. When you understand the difference between someone who wants you useful and someone who wants you whole. She faced forward. She breathed. Something was changing. The lawsuit settled on a Tuesday in March. Nora sat in Andrea Faust's office and read the final agreement. Derek paid back the $43,000, plus interest, plus a child support arrangement that Andrea described as more than fair. Visitation was structured and clear. Both parties had signed. Nora signed last. She put the pen down. She sat for a moment. How do you feel? Andrea said. Nora thought about it. Like someone who won something they should never have had to fight for, she said. That's exactly right, Andrea said. She walked out of the office into the March afternoon. The air was cold and bright. She stood on the sidewalk, a different sidewalk from the one in October, but she thought about that one anyway and looked up at the sky. The prison door was unlocked all along, she thought. I was just too afraid to see it. Not afraid of Derek specifically. Afraid of what would be on the other side of leaving, of starting from nothing, of being alone, of being the woman who failed at her relationship while pregnant. All the stories she had told herself about what would happen if she let go. But he had made the decision for her. He had put her on the sidewalk, and from the sidewalk she had built everything. She called Brenda from the street. It's done, she said when Brenda answered. It's done, Brenda repeated, like she was tasting the words. Done, Nora said. Brenda made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a cry. Where are you? She said. Market Street, Nora said. Don't move, Brenda said. I'll be there in 40 minutes. You're on shift. I'm getting off in 37 minutes. Don't move. Nora stood on Market Street in the March cold and thought about the last 5 months. The hospital, the zero in the savings account, the $218, the blueberry muffin on the bench in the November sun, Wren, 7 pounds and 2 ounces, the whole face in the yawn, the work, all the work, the portfolio updated at 2 in the morning, the proposals sent, the campaign that brought in 3 investors who hadn't been there before, the contract with terms she had negotiated herself, and one serious-faced man who walked at her pace without commenting on it. She had rebuilt everything, not back to what it was, better than what it was. Sturdier, more honest, more hers. Brenda arrived in 39 minutes and they ate sandwiches on a bench in the sun and talked until Brenda had to go back for an evening shift. That night, Nora put Wren to bed in the room of the apartment she had rented 2 months ago. A 2-bedroom in the inner sunset. Her name on the lease, her taste on every wall, her plants on the windowsill, her daughter's first drawings, first scribbles, just shapes on the refrigerator with fruit-shaped magnets. She sat on the couch with a glass of wine and looked at her apartment. I built this, she thought. From the sidewalk. Her phone buzzed. Griffin, how did the settlement go? She smiled. She had told him it was today. It went well, she wrote. It's done. 3 dots appeared. Then good. Are you free Saturday? For what, she wrote. A walk, he replied. The park by the reservoir. I'll bring coffee. She looked at Wren's bedroom door. She thought about all the things she had told herself she wasn't ready for. All the time she had asked for. She had asked for time. She had used the time. She had rebuilt an entire life with the time. She had learned to trust her own judgment again. She had learned to take up her space. She was ready. Saturday work, she wrote. We'll need room for a stroller, I know, he wrote. Saturday came with soft April light. The kind of light that arrives in San Francisco like an apology for all the gray months before it. Warm but not hot. The trees in the park starting to show green. Griffin was already there when she arrived with Wren in the stroller. 2 coffees. 1 decaf, because he had remembered. Just noted and remembered without making anything of it. They walked. He set his pace to hers. He pushed the stroller when she let him. Ren rode with the serious concentration of someone taking in important information. She looked at the trees, the sky, the people and dogs going past. They talked about his foundation, infrastructure in 3 countries, schools in 2. He was unexpectedly passionate about it. The precision went away when he talked about it. Something warmer replaced it. They talked about what she wanted to build in the next 5 years. She had been thinking about it. A studio of her own, small, focused, the kind of work she wanted to do for the clients she chose. You should do it, he said. I know, she said. I'm going to. Not a question, he said. I know, she said. It wasn't a question. He looked at her sideways. That not quite smile. They stopped at a bench near the water. Nora sat. Griffin sat beside her. Wren had fallen asleep in the stroller in the absolute convinced way of babies who have decided this particular moment is for sleeping. She's going to be trouble, Griffin said, looking at Wren. Of course she is, Nora said. She already looks like someone who knows exactly what she wants, he said. She gets that from me, Nora said. He smiled. The full smile. She had seen versions of it before, the precursor, the near miss. But this was the whole thing. It changed his face entirely, opened it up. There you are, she thought. She thought about all of it then, not in a sad way. Just clearly, the sidewalk, the rain, 2 sets of footsteps in the hallway, the way she had put the mug in the sink and walked out without begging, that woman on the sidewalk. She had not known then what she was capable of. She had not known what was on the other side of it. This was on the other side of it. Her apartment, her work, her daughter asleep in a stroller in the April sun, a man beside her who matched her pace and brought decaf because he had paid attention and smiled the kind of smile that changes a face. You're thinking something, Griffin said. I'm always thinking something, she said. What? He asked. She looked at him, the serious face, the careful man. The one who had said I would like to be in the room when things happened to you and meant every word. I'm thinking, she said, that you should take me to dinner Friday. Not a work dinner. He looked at her. Something in his face went very still. Then it settled. Friday, he said, one word, like something decided. Friday, she said. Wren woke up. She looked at the sky with the complete focused attention of someone conducting an inventory of the world. Then she looked at Griffin. She reached one hand toward him. Small fist. The way she reached for things she wanted to examine more closely. Griffin looked at the hand. He looked at Nora. She nodded. He gave Wren his finger. Wren grabbed it with the full conviction of someone who has decided this is hers now. Nora watched. She felt something in her chest that was so complete and simple that she had to take a breath just to hold it. 3 months later, Wallace Holt came to a company dinner. He sat across from Nora and spent 40 minutes conducting what Lena later described as his standard assessment of people Griffin brought into his orbit. He asked about her background, her work, her education, her plans. He asked about Wren with the particular kind of directness that was designed to make her feel like she was being evaluated for suitability. She answered every question directly. She did not qualify. She did not soften. She did not make herself smaller. At the end of the dinner, Wallace looked at her for a long moment. You're not what I expected, he said. What did you expect? She asked. Something simpler, he said. I'm sorry to disappoint, she said. You didn't, he said. That was it. That was Wallace Holt's version of approval. Lena confirmed it later. The moment came 3 months after that. A gala. Holt Capital's annual foundation dinner. The room was full of the kind of people who owned things. Griffin stood beside her. She was wearing a dark green dress she had bought specifically for this. Wren was at her mother's house with specific instructions about the bedtime routine. A man from another firm approached. He knew Griffin. He looked at Nora. He looked at Griffin. He made the assumption that men in these rooms always make. Your wife? He said. Direct, easy, certain. Griffin looked at the man. Then he looked at Nora. 1 second. Clear and deliberate. He looked back at the man. My wife, he said, Nora Callahan Holt. Not a correction, not a clarification, a declaration. The man smiled, moved on, said something that Nora did not hear because she was looking at Griffin. We're not married, she said quietly. Not yet, he said, equally quiet. She looked at him. That's a very confident statement, she said. I'm a confident person, he said. She thought about the elevator, the files on the marble floor, his hands catching her. She thought about the sidewalk, the rain, the $218. She thought about the woman she had been before the sidewalk and the woman she was now, and the distance between them which was enormous and which she had walked herself, step by step. She had not needed saving. She had needed time and space, and the strength that only comes from building something from nothing. She had all of that now. You're going to have to ask me properly, she said. I know, he said. With Wren present, she said. Obviously, he said. And not at a work event, she said. Understood, he said. She looked at him, the serious face, the full smile underneath it that she now knew was there. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. Ask me properly. With Wren, not at a work event. He looked at her for a long moment. I will, he said, soon. Soon, she agreed. They stood in the room full of people who owned things. Nora looked out at the room. She thought about all the women and all the lit windows she had watched from a cab on the worst night of her life. All those people inside. Warm, safe. She had wanted to be inside one of those windows so badly that night. She was inside one now, not because someone put her there, because she had built her way there. Through the sidewalk and the zero and the hospital bed and the 2 in the morning updates and the contracts negotiated and the campaigns delivered and the lawsuit won and the apartment signed in her name and the daughter named Wren who grabbed fingers with full conviction. The prison door was unlocked all along. I just had to walk through it. She had walked through it, and she had walked through it herself. Wren took her first steps on a Saturday morning in the kitchen. Nora was at the counter making coffee. Wren had been pulling herself up on the coffee table for 2 weeks, building towards something, the way she always did. Patient and determined and convinced it was going to happen when she decided it was time. Nora heard a particular silence from the living room. She turned. Wren was standing, both hands off the table, both feet on the floor, looking at Nora with an expression of complete and serious intent. Then she let go and walked 3 steps, 4, 5, 6. She sat down at Nora's feet with the decisive thump of someone who has accomplished what they set out to accomplish and is done for now. Nora stood above her with both hands over her mouth. "You did it," she said. Wren looked up at her, very pleased, very certain, already ready to do it again. Nora scooped her up and held her and pressed her face into the warm top of Wren's head and breathed her in, the particular smell, still warm and certain after all these months. "You did it," she said again, into the dark hair. Griffin arrived at 10 with coffee. He had a key to the apartment. They were not yet married. He had asked, properly, with Wren present, not at a work event on a Sunday morning in this very kitchen, down on one knee on the tile floor, with a ring that was exactly right, and Wren in Nora's arms watching with solemn infant attention. She had said yes. The wedding was planned for autumn. He came in now and saw Nora's face, the particular brightness of it. "What happened?" he said. "She walked," Nora said. He put the coffees on the counter. He went to the living room. He sat down on the kitchen floor, just like that, right there on the tile, at Wren's level. Wren looked at him. He looked at her. "Show me," he said. Wren Callahan considered this request. She stood up, holding the coffee table. She looked at Griffin. She looked at the distance between them. She let go 5 steps, 6, 7. She reached him and grabbed his knee with both hands. He caught her. Both hands. "Steady." "Good girl," he said. Wren patted his knee with the authority of someone who has made her point. Nora leaned against the counter with her coffee and watched them. This man on the kitchen floor, this daughter who had learned to walk toward people worth walking toward. She felt something so complete that it almost had a sound. A deep, quiet note. The kind of note that means everything has arrived where it was supposed to. She had lost everything. She had built something better. She had been invisible. She had learned to fill her space. She had been thrown onto a sidewalk in the rain, 7 months pregnant, with $218 and a life that needed rebuilding from the very foundation. And she had built it. Not because someone rescued her. Not because a feared billionaire had appeared and solved her problems. Griffin had not solved her problems. She had solved her problems. She had gotten the lawyer and done the work and delivered the campaigns and won the lawsuit and signed her own lease and furnished her own rooms. She had done all of that, and then she had made room for someone who was worth making room for, who matched her pace, who held things with both hands, who said names like they were worth saying, who asked her properly with Wren present on a Sunday morning on the kitchen floor. Griffin looked up at her from his seat on the tile. "She's going to be relentless," he said. "I know," Nora said. "She gets it from me." He smiled, a full smile. The one that still changed his face entirely, the one that was just for her. Nora looked at her kitchen, her window, her April light coming through it, her daughter standing between her and the man she had chosen. Not the man who arrived to save her, the man who had waited while she saved herself. She looked at all of it, and she thought, this is what was on the other side. This is what I walked through the rain for. This is mine. She picked up her coffee. She walked into her Saturday morning.